If you want to get better at cinematography, you've got to practice all the time. But most of us don't have easy access to a big crew, or actors, or a lot of fancy gear, so what do? Well, why not practice filming yourself? In this video, we're going to talk about how to find inspiration and how to find interesting locations, which gear to use whether you're a beginner or you're more advanced. Then I'll take you through some specific techniques like shooting with all manual Cine lenses. In this case, I'll be using the DZOFilm Vespid 2 kit. I'll show you some special techniques like filming wide low-angle shots, defocusing yourself in the foreground, and shooting B-roll with longer lenses. Then we're going to dive into some minimalist lighting techniques using the tiny Godox ML100R lights to add just the right touch to the natural light in the scene. We'll do a few quick indoor shots, then we'll simulate daylight outdoors, and then we'll use the lights to create a neon glow at night. And finally, I'll show a few experimental techniques for using AI to replace the lights with practical sources for some interesting results. All right, so let's jump in and learn how to practice cinematography all by yourself. This video is sponsored in part by DZOFilm. If you want to practice cinematography, the first step is to find the right inspiration. And the first step to that is to start thinking realistically about what you're going to be able to shoot. You're not going to be able to make Dune all on your own. We all love Dune, we would all love to shoot Dune, but unless your dad owns a studio, you probably won't start out by shooting Dune. So let's find some more appropriate inspiration. My recommendation is to find movies shot in a similar environment to yours. The tool that I like to use for this is ShotDeck. So this is not sponsored, I have no relationship with ShotDeck at all. It's just a very useful website for searching for a specific kind of location or a specific type of shot, and then finding still frames from movies that you can use to kickstart your imagination. Movies have been shot everywhere, and even the most boring environments have been made cinematic. So you can search for shots done in a similar environment to places that you might be able to access. So for instance, I found this neon sign, and I took a photo on my phone, saved the location data so that I'd be able to go back there and shoot one day. I searched on ShotDeck for shots done in Hong Kong, and I found this still frame. Now the goal here is not to copy, it's just to make something that looks good, even if it's completely different from the source material. Nobody's ever going to know where you got your inspiration. All you have to do is make a shot that you find interesting. But you may be thinking, okay, but I don't live in Hong Kong, I live in Topeka, Kansas. What do? I would start just by searching Instagram for my city and scrolling. You might find some unexpectedly cinematic locations. I like to find places that seem to be public, so I won't get kicked out for shooting there, and that have some sort of character or history. Then I look them up on maps, and I check out how they look in real life. Another search I like to do is the word hidden, and then the name of my city. It's a great starting point for finding inspiring locations that not everybody's going to be using. There's interesting spots to shoot almost everywhere on Earth if you just do a little research. Okay, now we'll go into the gear that you can use to practice filmmaking. Now I'm going to start off by saying you could use just about anything. There aren't really any rules, but my advice here would be to generally keep it simple, make sure you can fit everything in a backpack, and even if you already own a lot of gear, only take out a few pieces at a time. Otherwise, the options will become overwhelming. So at least you need a camera. I've been using the Sony a7S III for almost 5 years, but you can use whatever camera you already own. And at least you need one lens. And I recommend a prime lens because they generally have more character in the image and they have wider apertures. I'll be using the DZOFilm Vespid 2 lenses in this video, but most primes will work just fine for your practice. It's more important to pay attention to what you put in front of the lens. And if you're only going to use one lens, I recommend starting with a 35mm f1.8. If you're going to be shooting in the daytime, you do need a variable ND filter so you can keep your shutter locked at 1/50th of a second if you're shooting 24p, or basically double whatever your shutter speed would be. It's called a 180-degree shutter. Then, if you're filming yourself, you will need some kind of a tripod. I have several travel tripods and mini tripods I like to use. I usually don't use a full-size tripod for my practice shots because they're just too bulky. And then if you want to get more advanced, you might want to bring along a light. For this video, I'll be using the ultra-portable and powerful Godox ML100R, which is a 100-watt full-color RGB video light with some really interesting accessories that you can power via USB. And for your light, you'll of course need some kind of light stand. I use the same mini tripods for my light as I do for my camera. I just sometimes attach my Shinewee carbon fiber extension rod on top of the mini tripod to get some extra height. So that's basically all the gear you need to get started. A camera, a prime lens, some kind of tripod, and then maybe a light and some kind of light stand. All right, let's start shooting. Here's the first shot that I'm going to break down for you. This is a low, wide-angle shot of myself watching an airplane fly by. I shot this on the Vespid 2 18mm lens because for this shot, I wanted to show the size of that massive building behind me. So to make it look huge, I needed a wide-angle lens. Now we'll go step by step into how I set up and filmed this shot. First, I put the camera on my mini tripod at a low angle. Then I tilted up the lens about 45 degrees. Then I walked to my position in the shot and I extended another mini tripod and I set it down there. I used that mini tripod as a stand-in to set my focus because these lenses are all manual, so I couldn't just rely on autofocus to keep me sharp. Then I lowered that mini tripod, but I left it in place to use as a mark so I knew where to stand in the frame. So then I could just walk up to the tripod and be in perfect focus and framing in my shot. But there was still something missing in this composition. The sky was pretty empty, so I added an airplane. I just grabbed some random image of a plane from online, and then I removed the background with one of those free background removing websites. Then I dropped that plane image onto my timeline as a separate layer, and I added some Gaussian blur to defocus it a bit to match the background, and I adjusted its position to make it fly across the frame. Now the shot really takes advantage of the depth of the location. There's action happening in the foreground all the way to the deep distance. Another reason to shoot low and wide is if you have an interesting sign or something above you in the background and you want to feature it and show how big it is. I set up this shot the same way as the last one, using my selfie stick tripod as a stand-in to set my focus and my framing. Then I pushed down the selfie stick and used it as a mark so I knew where to stand in the frame. This time I put myself in the lower half of the frame so that I wouldn't cover up the sign behind me. Putting myself in the frame below the sign gave a sense of scale. Because there's a person in the frame, you can feel how large the sign is. So whenever you're in a location that has something interesting overhead, you can try doing this type of low and wide shot to incorporate yourself into a composition with a lot of depth. When filming yourself, it of course feels natural to always put yourself in perfect focus. But since we're shooting with manual lenses, why not get creative with it? One technique I like to do is focusing on the background instead of the subject in the foreground. Not only does this create an interesting composition, it also means you don't have to worry about your subject being out of focus, because they're supposed to be out of focus anyway. This tends to work better with telephoto lenses rather than wide lenses, because with a telephoto lens, you can defocus your subject more. For this shot, I used the silhouette of this hallway as a framing device. Then I positioned myself in the empty part of the frame, where there are no islands over the water, and I walked straight toward the camera, staying in the same area of the composition. For this shot, I set up my tripod facing the water and waited for a boat. Then once I saw a boat, I ran to my mark, and then I continued walking across the frame as the boat moved toward me. This opposing motion makes the shot more interesting because you have a complementary movement on either side of the frame. Here's another one I did just a few minutes later. This time, all the boats crossing the frame created that opposing motion, and I put myself in the middle as sort of an audience surrogate. In other words, the audience can imagine themselves as me, observing all these boats and being in this scene. So the next time you find an interesting background for your shot, consider putting yourself out of focus in the foreground. Next, we're going to talk about filming B-roll moments using a telephoto lens. A longer lens lets you pick out smaller moments from the big picture, so you can find unique compositions that feel more subjective and more personal. And it also helps you get more shots in a shorter period of time, because instead of capturing just a few big wide shots, you can get a lot of detail shots instead. When I'm composing these B-roll shots, I like to look for contrasting elements, like the hard angles of this building versus the soft texture of the clouds, or the warm colors of the building versus the cooler tones of the other buildings in the distance. Here's another one: warm colored building, cool colored sky. This shot combines layers of buildings to create an abstract composition. Here, I manually racked focus from the dolphins in the foreground to the skyline in the background. This added some motion to an otherwise static frame. As sunset became dusk, I cooled down my white balance to 4100K to let the image go deep blue. And I just caught random moments as people enjoyed the view. It certainly helps having a beautiful city like Hong Kong as your environment, but you can find great B-roll shots in any location if you just look carefully and you find the right light. This part of the video is proudly sponsored by DZOFilm. I asked DZOFilm if I could use their Vespid 2 prime lenses because this is a set of relatively compact cine primes that deliver a really sharp and vibrant look, which makes them great as an all-purpose kit of lenses for filmmakers shooting solo or shooting with small crews, and especially for people shooting on location. These are T1.9 lenses, which is the same as f1.8, and they weigh about 800 grams each, and they have a consistent 77mm filter thread, so you can use the same filters across the whole set. They have a very large image circle covering full-frame VistaVision sensors and even some medium format cameras. Optically, these lenses are designed to minimize chromatic aberration, lens breathing, and flare, so you get a tack-sharp image from edge to edge at all apertures. So your shot looks clean, but not clinical. They still do have a bit of character in the bokeh. The focus throw is about 270 to 300 degrees depending on the lens, so they will feel familiar if you've ever pulled focus with Cine lenses before. One high-end feature is that they support Cook eye technology, which captures lens metadata like focus and aperture automatically. Now, this isn't a feature that I personally need, but it is a great time saver for people who are doing VFX heavy work. So these Vespid 2s are basically your all-around daily shooting lenses that you can use for all kinds of filmmaking when you just need a clean starting point for your image. Next, we're going to talk about practicing lighting by yourself. It can be tricky to replicate natural light as a solo shooter because to imitate the sun, you usually need really large light sources. Hollywood films will literally use tons of lighting gear for this purpose, but since we're solo shooting here, we're going to do things a much simpler way. Here I'll be using the Godox ML100R lights, which are tiny, portable, 100-watt RGB lights that have some amazingly creative accessories. For this first shot, all I needed was a pop of light to pull me out of the background of the living room because the spot where I wanted to stand was in the shadows. On the ML100R, I put my reflector first. Then on that, I put this collapsible rubber parallel beam adapter, which basically turns it into a spotlight with a 5-degree spread. I powered it by plugging it into the wall via USB-C on my 100-watt wall charger. Then I set the white balance of the light to 4100K to match the color of the light coming from the windows. I angled the light down about 45 degrees, and I raised it up on my light stand. This is an Ulanzi AT01 tripod, and I put a Shinewee carbon fiber rod on top of it to get extra height. So with that ML100R positioned just out of frame, I was able to get a spot of hard light right where I needed it. So here was my shot with the light off, and now here's the shot with the light turned on. Since the beam of light was so narrow, I didn't need to use any additional flags or accessories to control spill. And I was able to walk from the artificial light back into the natural light seamlessly. Next, I wanted to do a shot on the beautiful balcony of this house overlooking the living room because I had that afternoon light filling up the whole background. I just didn't have a spot of light exactly where I wanted to stand in the frame. So once again, I raised up the light with the parallel beam adapter on it, and I focused it on just the spot where I would be standing in the shot. This gave me a strong side light that looks pretty natural because the light is several meters away, imitating the look of daylight coming from a window. Then I filmed myself walking up to the spot and looking over the edge, and here's the result. I was able to film this really wide shot with just one small light because I didn't worry about lighting the background, I just focused the light on me as the subject. This next shot is inspired by the natural looking lighting in this still frame from the film Saltburn. This is the kind of medium shot that you'll do all the time for dialogue scenes or interviews, so it's a good one to practice. But the natural light, once again, was only falling on the background. I raised up the light a little bit above my head, and I positioned it off to the side and slightly behind the chair, about 2.5 meters away. Then with the camera facing the chair directly, I got this composition. The light added that extra dramatic edge on the side of my face to focus the viewer's attention on me instead of the background. Good boy. Now we're going to take this little light outside and do the same trick. This time I'm going to be using an 85mm lens to make those distant buildings feel a bit closer in the frame. I put my hat on the selfie stick tripod to create a lighting stand-in, and I brought out my light with the parallel beam adapter on it, and I powered it using this 100-watt power bank. I put the light a few meters away and I aimed it at the side of my hat while using my phone as a wireless monitor with the monitor and control app. Then I pushed down the selfie stick and I stood in its place. My SmallRig iPhone 17 case has a kickstand, so I set the phone on the ground angled up so that I could keep an eye on the composition the whole time. And here's the final shot with my fake sunset light in the foreground and the real sunlight in the background. Next, I wanted to put some direct sunlight on this convenience store to make it look like a hot summer afternoon, instead of early dusk. I once again set up my hat as the stand-in, and I turned on the light. Then I changed my camera's white balance to 6900K, making things look much warmer. The shop owner helped me out by being a live stand-in, and then I thanked him and I took his place. I walked into frame and grabbed an ice-cold soda from the refrigerator with the ML100R projecting sunlight from about 4 meters away. And because the parallel beam adapter has only that 5-degree spread, it didn't spill anywhere except where I needed it. So I didn't need to flag it off, and the spill light also didn't bother any other people in the area. And here's the final shot. All the direct sunlight in this shot is from that single 100-watt light. This next lighting setup is at night. I wanted to do a shot featuring this old flickering neon sign in the background. The foreground already had enough ambient light to get a good exposure, but it didn't feel like the light was coming from a neon sign. So I set up my camera with a 35mm lens on a mini tripod to get a low perspective. Then I brought out my Godox inflatable airsoft tube, which is so much easier to use and more compact than a softbox. You just use this strap to tighten it on the reflector and it's installed. Once again, I powered it with my power bank, which I also used to set my mark for where to stand. I adjusted the color of the light to be similar to the neon sign behind me, and I kept it at a low angle because I wanted a bit of that unnatural looking upward glow. And then I set up a second light with the parallel beam adapter as my backlight. Since this other light was far away, I controlled it with Bluetooth using the Godox Light app, which let me set all the parameters on my phone. And then I switched over to the monitor and control app to check the results. So here you're seeing the final setup, and here are the results. The lights added just a bit more color and character to the shot for that old school Hong Kong feeling. Alright, we could be done here, but we're not. There's one more little lighting trick I've been playing around with, replacing the light in post with something else using AI. So for this shot, I set up the light with the inflatable airsoft tube on the table behind me. I wanted the light to be in frame to simulate a practical source. So I exported a still frame, and I brought it into Google Gemini, and I prompted to replace it with a desk lamp and some scattered newspapers like a film noir movie. I brought that still image back into Resolve and I added it as a layer on top of my original footage. Then I did a rough mask in the color tab, added an alpha output, and basically created a split screen where the AI generated image just covers the light and the table. So here's the final result. The Godox light became a real desk lamp. Okay, one more example. This one's a little wilder. I put the same light in the middle of my bed and I set it to the fire effect preset. Then I exported a still image, imported it into Kling, and I prompted it to generate a video replacing the light with a fire. It took a lot of tries once again to get something usable and I burned a bunch of credits. Eventually I got something good enough, so I brought it into Resolve and dropped it on top of my original footage as another layer. Then I made a quick mask in the color tab so the AI generated video only covered the left part of the frame. Then I used the cinematic haze effect on top to create some ambient smoke in the room. On top of that, I added an adjustment layer with some camera shake. And here's the final result. It may look chaotic, but this was 100% safe to shoot. Personally, I prefer doing AI this way with the split screen technique rather than doing fully AI generated video because the most important part of the shot, the person, is still real. Okay, those are some tips and techniques for practicing cinematography all by yourself. I want to say thank you to DZOFilm for sponsoring part of the video. I also want to thank Godox for letting me use their ML100R lights. If you want to know more about the gear or learn more from me, there will be links in the description. So thanks so much for watching and I will see you next time.